status of the troubled Venda-based VBS Mutual Bank and whether it will be put under curatorship. Let's now listen in.
VBS was granted a permanent mutual bank license on the 11th of October 2000. The legislative requirements of mutual banks are different from the regulatory framework for the supervision of commercial banks. VBS has several branches, predominantly in the Limpopo province, with a head office and a corporate office located in Makhado and Johannesburg, respectively. VBS experienced increasing liquidity challenges over the last 18 months. These problems emanated from a failure of the board of directors and executive management to manage the mutual bank's rapid growth and its funding and liquidity position. This resulted in VBS being placed under increased regulatory scrutiny. The liquidity challenges emanated from the maturity of a large concentration of deposits from municipalities and was exacerbated by the termination of other sizable deposits and the inability to source sufficient funding timeously. It was highly risky for VBS to take sizable municipal deposits that were short-term and lend them out long-term. The liquidity challenges faced by VBS resulted in difficulty to settle its obligations in the national payment system on several occasions. Against the backdrop of the severe liquidity crisis which prevails at VBS, the Minister of Finance, upon recommendation by the Registrar of Banks, has decided to put VBS Mutual Bank under curatorship with effect from 1700 this Sunday, the 11th of March 2018. The Office of the Registrar of Banks is tasked, amongst others, with the promotion of the safety of depositors' funds placed with the banks. This function is essential in ensuring that depositors retain confidence and trust in the South African banking system. The SARB wishes to confirm that retail deposits at VBS amounting to 50,000 rands per depositor are guaranteed. Other depositors are hereby also informed that the curator will act in the best interest of all creditors. VBS will remain open for business. The curator will ensure that all loans due are collected as part of the normal collection processes, but also importantly, that lending and transactional banking services continue. The South African Reserve Bank is of the view that the appointment of a curator is in the best interest of the public and VBS depositors. Furthermore, curatorship presents the most suitable and most effective mechanism to facilitate the orderly management of the bank. Through curatorship, the SARB is given the legal means to create the necessary mechanisms to implement a resolution plan which will seek to ensure the sustainability of VBS. With the appointment of the curator, the current board and management are relieved of their powers and these are vested in the curator. In this regard, Sizwe Nsaluba Goboto Advisory Services has been appointed in terms of Section 81 of the Mutual Banks Act number 124 of 1993, read with Section 69 of the Banks Act number 94 of 1990 as the curator to VBS Mutual Bank. Sizwe Nsaluba Goboto Advisory Services will at all relevant times be represented by Mr. Anush Ruplal. Mr. Ruplal is a partner and the head of the financial services group of Sizwe Nsaluba Goboto. His CV will be provided to you as part of the press pack. The SARB wishes to assure the public that the South African banking system remains safe, sound, and adequately capitalized. At this stage, I would like to turn to you for any questions that you might have, and as usual, please identify yourself and the media house that you represent. One, two, three.
Governor Hilary Jaffe from Business Day.
Two questions. The first is there have been accusations. We understand that this is a sort of attack, as it were, on the only successful black-owned bank in the country, and I wondered what your response was to that accusations, that is, from the bank's board itself. The second is, I wonder if you could give us a flavour of what does this bank look like? What are its assets? How large is it? Who does it lend to? What are its depositors? Thanks.
There is a little face there. Press on that little face.
The face.
Monique Vedek from CNBC. I wanted to know, why did the municipality stop taking business from VBS? Why was that decision taken?
Why did municipalities?
So, I mean, according to media reports, there was a decision taken by Treasury that municipalities could no longer do business with VBS. So what was the rationale for that?
Sir?
Pumzile, from a black opinion. I have 4 questions on that. I don't know if I should go with the 4 questions or not. But one, the South African Reserve Bank is seen as a defender of white monopoly capital, right? The South African Reserve Bank took Umamu Mkhwebane, the public protector, to court for saying by ABSA must pay back the money that is stolen from Reserve Bank.
What is the question?
So now, why not give full license to VBS Bank instead of punishing them? And is it true? This is what actually is outside. Is it true that actually you are punishing VBS Bank to please white monopoly capital for VBS Bank for giving loan to the former president Jacob Zuma?
Okay, your question about the attack, Hillary, that this is an attack on black banks. The South African Reserve Bank regulates and licenses and regulates banks. And the color of money is red, is green, it's yellow, it's blue. If you apply for a banking license and you are taking deposits, you will be supervised in terms of the Banks Act, irrespective of who owns you. So this notion that the Reserve Bank decided to attack a black bank has got to be condemned. It is just plain wrong. We supervise all banks irrespective of who owns the banks, and we must understand we regulate the banks in public interest so that we could protect the depositors' funds. Size of the bank, I will get to Ben just now. Suffice to say that this is a bank that had actually grown very rapidly over the past few years, and Deputy Governor Naidu will give you the full statistics. Why did the municipalities get told to not to do business with VBS? I don't know if that is the case. I do know that they were told that they are breaking the law. In terms of the Municipal Finance Management Act, municipalities should be placing their deposits with banks registered in terms of the Banks Act. A mutual bank is not registered in terms of the Banks Act. So those municipalities that had deposits with VBS had actually broken the law. And actually so has VBS in accepting those deposits. So it's as simple as that. It is not the Reserve Bank that said that that should not be done. It was simply the Treasury saying that in terms of the law, you are not supposed to place deposits with a bank that is not registered in terms of the Banks Act. Phumzile, why don't you give VBS a full bank license? You see, we don't give licenses. You apply for a license, and because you have applied for a license, we process your application. The entire licensing process could take anything between 12 and 18 months. Can I say to you that VBS only submitted an application for a full commercial license last week?
How far have you assisted that?
You asked a question. Can I just answer your question, and then we'll get to that. So they have submitted an application. That application must be processed. There is a whole process that includes evaluations that takes place within the bank. And I'm saying to you, it takes between 12 and 18 months, depending on the quality of the information that has been submitted. And then you say that this bank is being punished because it gave a loan to the former president. Can I repeat this? The South African Reserve Bank does not get involved in the relationship between the bank and its clients. That has been consistent. Whether it is this bank or any other bank that we deal with in South Africa, we do not get involved in that. It is the bank's management and its board of directors that makes decisions. And those decisions are theirs alone, and they must live with their decisions. We do not get involved in the processing of either a loan, or you want to place a deposit, or the bank has closed your account. We do not get involved in the relationship between a bank and its clients. Deputy Governor Naidu, you have the numbers.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. The bank has grown incredibly rapidly over the last 3 years. They've literally grown from a balance sheet of about 150 million rand 3 years ago to a balance sheet just over 2 billion rand today. And that's mainly because of a significant increase in municipal deposits over that period. They have just over 1 billion rand of municipal deposits. We still have to verify some of these figures, but we think at the peak they probably had about 1.5 billion rand of municipal deposits. They've got a mortgage loan book plus minus 300 million rand, mainly to people in the Limpopo area, mainly to people on tribal land or with permission to occupy. They have about 1 billion rand in what I would call small business finance, mainly to business people who have some sort of government tender or government contract, either with the municipality, an SOE, or the provincial government, and they've provided municipal support, finance to them. About 18 months ago, we picked up that there's a significant increase, or the start of a pickup in significant increase in deposits from municipalities to this bank. We put the bank under intensive supervision and repeatedly engaged with them about the risks involved. If you take a deposit from a municipality, let's say municipality X puts 100 million rand deposit there, the relative maturity of that deposit is likely to be short. They're either putting it there for 6 months or 3 months or maybe 1 year. It's quite a risky strategy to take that money and lend it long term. Right? And we think that this is the nub of the problem. That they took short-term municipal deposits, excessively large short-term municipal deposits, and lent some of that long-term. And so when municipalities came asking for the money, the bank was not able to pay it. In terms of the legal position around the deposits, in October 2016, a member of parliament asked the National Treasury to look into the matter of municipal deposits at VBS. In about August 2017, the National Treasury issued a circular advising municipalities that this might be a contravention of the Municipal Finance Management Act. And we did start seeing some withdrawal of deposits. However, it's my view that even if there was no circular issued by the National Treasury, it is still risky business to take large municipal deposits, municipalities which need the cash, and put it on long-term loans. You will at some point suffer a liquidity problem. So that's my contribution in terms of the second one. Governor, they applied for a banking loan a banking license on the 26th of February at 8:42 a.m.
Okay, you said you had 4 questions. You asked 2. I'll come back to you. Can I take ma'am and sir and 3?
Governor Nompumelelo Sizibert, SABC. I just wanted to ask, at the point that you realized that VBS was taking deposits from municipalities at an accelerated rate, why is it then that you didn't take action, presumably because at that point they were already breaking the law, no?
Governor Mateo Kharipe from ENCA. My first question is, given the numbers that you have in front of you, do you think it's possible to salvage the bank? And secondly, the bank was looking to list on the JSE. Will the curatorship affect that? And thirdly, there is a bank called Itala Bank, which is also a mutual bank that has, according to its CEO, some municipal deposits as well. Will it be affected in the near future?
Yes, I'm Bongani Nkosi from the Star newspaper. How many municipalities are we talking about here, and are you perhaps able to name some of them?
Okay. Yes, sir.
I just want to ask Governor, what will this mean for the PIC as a shareholder and other shareholders?
Okay. I thought that I had answered the question about the MFMA, but and Kuben had also dealt with it. But I will. Maybe he can explain it better than, in more detail than I had. When we saw that they are taking the deposit, why didn't you act? You act then is the question. So, Mr. Registrar, you are on your own on that one. Is the bank salvageable? The curator must go in there and assess. And the whole idea in putting banks under curatorships is because you believe that maybe it might just be salvageable. And what you then do is that you then look at what options are there for that bank going forward. There's no bank that has gone into curatorship and continues on the business model that it had before it went into curatorship. So necessarily you're going to have to look at different business models for that bank under curatorship. But for you to do that, you needed somebody to be keeping things steady, and that is why you appoint a curator. Somebody said that the bank was planning for a listing. I guess now it just postpones the listing because it must first come out of curatorship for it to be listed. Itala, you can also talk to Itala. Municipalities, how many there are? About 21 of those municipalities. Should we name them? Well, they are also clients of a bank, and once again, we cannot get to say, oh, this municipality is the client of this bank, so we do not get into that, but they are 21 municipalities. What would this mean for the PIC and the other shareholders? Well, I think that you can ask the PIC what this thing eventually means for them. We can't answer for the PIC and for the other shareholders. Remember that a bank takes deposits. And because it has taken deposits, it needs to earn some returns. So it has to generate, to write up a book. They must accumulate assets. And in that process, what happens is that the banks get engaged in a very important service in the economy called maturity transformation. So in the main, the banks would be taking deposits, and there aren't many depositors who place deposits for 10 years. There are the people who might place deposits for the next 5 years or so, but they do not place deposits for a period of 10 years. But when you go to the bank and you want to buy a house, you want to repay the house over 20 years. So the role played by the banks then is that they transform the maturity. So in other ways, banks keep on taking these deposits and they have got long-term assets. So the deposits keep on being rolled. If these deposits keep on being rolled, the bank is fine. But it could also happen that the deposits are not rolled. And when the deposits are not rolled, the bank faces a maturity mismatch. And if depositors feel that this bank, it looks like when I come back, I will not get my deposit, the depositors run, and it triggers what you would simply call a bank run. To cushion the depositors, we request that shareholders put shareholder capital. So that is why we will keep on talking about the capital adequacy of the banks. And so shareholders have to put in capital. And so the shareholders of VBS, of course, had a choice. They could have decided to put additional capital and add additional liquidity to the institution. And so you want to know what becomes of them, you direct that question to them and says, you were shareholders in this bank, and the bank is under curatorship, where to from here? Naidu.
Thanks, Chair. The question about what did we do about it? I mean, from the moment that we picked it up, we engaged with the bank. We said to the bank that this is risky. We said to the bank that this is not sustainable, that they need to review their business model and they need to reduce their dependence on such large deposits, particularly municipal deposits. I mean, despite those discussions, the bank increased the amount of deposits that they took, and they also lent a significant proportion of those deposits that they took.
Sorry, Mr. Knight, I just want to interject there, because you're talking about the riskiness of them taking so much deposits from these municipalities. My question is about the principle, the fact that they were taking money from municipalities. Weren't they crossing a line there, whether they were taking R1 or R1,000,000? That's my question. And if they were violating the law by so doing, why didn't you tell them to stop and, take this action now?
That is exactly what the Treasury did. That's exactly what the Treasury did. The Treasury said to the municipalities, sorry, you are placing deposits with a mutual bank. You're not supposed to place deposits with a mutual bank. And they referred to that circular that was issued in August last year or something like that.
Chair, on Itala Bank is not a mutual bank. Itala Bank is a bank that operates under exemption from the Banks Act issued by the Minister of Finance. So presently there are two banks, Post Bank and Itala Bank, that operate as banks under exemption from the Banks Act. We do supervise those banks, but they do not comply with all aspects of the Banks Act, and they do not have a banking license. The Minister of Finance in those two cases have given them an exemption from the Banks Act to operate.
And both happen to be owned by the state. Bongan.
Just to follow up on what the registrar has just said, if they were extended that from Treasury, could that not be the same situation, given that the municipalities had already deposited the money within the bank accounts of VBS? Could we not have a third one, given that so much money was already given in by 21 municipalities? Could that not have been an option instead of curatorship?
Ma'am, just let me take a number of. Okay, that will be a very interesting one, because I know a couple of established banks now run by black people. You're suggesting that it's only black management that needs to be supervised. That's wrong. No, I'm not saying that it's you who said so. It's wrong to say that you raise compliance issues because there are black people involved. I said, you regulate a bank, you regulate a bank. It doesn't matter who is running a bank. Black, white, pink, red, yellow, it doesn't matter. If you have a banking license, you shall be supervised in terms of the Banks Act and the regulations that are issued in terms of the Banks Act. Naidu.
I'm not sure if I fully understood Kondani's question.
Well, the reason I gave it to you is because I didn't understand it.
Registrar, it's Moteo. I was saying, if we have two banks that you say were given provision by the finance minister to operate as they are now, could that have not been an option for VBS Bank as well, instead of curatorship?
I guess the narrow answer to that is you'll have to ask the Minister of Finance, right? He has the power to give an exemption from the Banks Act. The Registrar of Banks does not have the power to give exemption to the Banks Act. However, both the Post Bank and Itala are state-owned, and therefore the state guarantees the deposits in both institutions. The Post Bank is allowed to take deposits, which the state guarantees, but they're not allowed to lend the deposits. So there's relatively low risk on their balance sheet from losing depositors' money. I think that there's a significant moral hazard if the Minister of Finance were to say to a privately owned bank, you can operate under exemption, which essentially means you can take money from depositors but not comply with any of the requirements of being a bank. I think the social contract here is not about whether it's a black bank or a white bank. It's about protecting the depositors. And in this case, most of the depositors, most of the Stockfelds that have placed money in this bank, most of the rural people who have transactional accounts with this bank are black. Right? And we have a legal obligation to protect them as well.
Danny, you wanted to add something? Ma'am?
So what were the events that led up to today's decision? I mean, why this week?
Okay. Should we be done it next week? Now we'll get to that.
Governor, I just wanted to know, as a point of clarity, when African Bank was placed under curatorship, we saw in the JSE that the BEE-owned shares completely lost money from that happening. What are the bad things that could happen in terms of the clientele that are within VBS Bank?
Clientele? In terms of the clientele? You mean the clientele, you mean the depositors and the okay. Hillary?
What happens, can you spell out what the implications are for the bank's clients? In other words, when VBS opens for business tomorrow morning, what happens for the lenders and for the depositors? So could you just spell that out? And also, who are the bank's shareholders, and have you been in discussions with them as well over the period in which you've been engaging with management to alert them of the very high risks that they've been taking?
Group, you want to talk about African Bank curatorship and what had happened there, and then Naidu, I'm relying on you again. Okay, go first. Kuben.
Thanks. Let me spell out the events that led up to the decision. VBS has been suffering from liquidity problems for some time. Those liquidity problems got worse. The trigger was that on the 16th of February this year, they failed to honor an obligation on the national payment system. So the national payment system, which is run by the SARB, it's a settlement system, and the bank failed to honor an obligation on that system. We had discussions with the bank around these issues, and essentially they said that some municipalities want their deposits back, and we don't have any money to give it to them. At which point we began engaging with the two largest shareholders of the bank and the board and management of the bank about a rescue plan. So we asked the bank to put in a rescue plan to be able to manage their liquidity crisis over the next few days. We also engaged with the major shareholders about what role they could play in managing those liquidity obligations. It is highly likely, or at least highly unlikely, that any of the major shareholders will be able to provide the amount of finance at the speed at which the bank requires to be able to manage the liquidity situation. Remember, people who put money into banks are investors, and they invest the money on behalf of other people, perhaps pension funds and so forth. And they also have to make prudent decisions when they invest in an institution. And so after what we think is an exhaustive process of engaging with the board, management, and the major shareholders, we do not see a solution to the liquidity problems of the bank other than the solution provided through curatorship. Let me move on to then what we think the process is likely to be. The first is that people who have got loans with VBS should continue to pay those loans. And the bank will continue to operate. It will continue to operate its transactional accounts, and it will continue to lend. It will continue to recover repayments on those loans. Small depositors with deposits of less than 50,000 rand should be able to access their money overnight, immediately. But we are appealing that people who have deposits with the bank understand that those are protected. Right, and that government is protecting those deposits. It is likely that the curator will have to put in place a plan to manage the liquidity situation going forward. So it is quite likely that all depositors will not be able to get their money immediately. Right? The curator will have to take the interests of creditors into account, and will have to, over a period of time, put in place an operational plan to essentially remedy the liquidity crisis that the bank is in. In other words, either to liquidate some loans, or to wait for these loans to be repaid, or to see an increase in the cash reserves of the bank to be able to pay some of the depositors back. In some ways, to develop a formula through which those depositors will be paid back. That's the job of the curator. And the curator has got the legal instruments to be able to do that. Yeah, I think I've covered that.
Thank you, Hilary. The way I understood your question was whether, as with African Bank, black shoulders lost money, and whether that could be repeated. First of all shareholders in African Bank, irrespective of their color, lost money, because obviously the market assesses, it was a listed share, assesses the future earnings, the future cash flows, discounts that, and if there's a difference between a particular starting price and market's reassessment, obviously the market price adjusts. And that affected all shareholders. The market doesn't punish black shareholders more than it punishes non-black shareholders. So similarly in this particular instance, if there are shareholders, irrespective of their hue, that are listed or where their shares are traded, and the market reassesses the net present value of the future cash flows from a particular investment, it may re-rate that, and that may lead to changes in price. But now let's come back to the whole question of banking and curatorship, etc. You have to differentiate. Part of why the bank intervenes with a curatorship is because you say what you're trying to do is, first of all, to protect depositors, but you also try to protect any other persons, although indirectly, that may have an interest. Because often when we intervene is because a bank has a liquidity crisis but is still solvent. But in terms of banking practice and theory, a liquidity crisis may become a solvency crisis, because when a bank has a liquidity crisis, it has to pay up for funding, that has a negative impact on its profitability, that erodes its capital levels, etc., and eventually that may spill over into a solvency crisis. So part of intervention, and there's a very fine balance, because on the one hand, when a bank experiences problems, you don't want to immediately place it under curatorship. On the downside, if you wait too long, more and more value evaporates. And so this is a very, very fine balance that we do. And often when there are issues, there is persistent engagement between the regulator and the bank, bearing in mind that the regulator is not responsible for the management of the bank. So we can raise particular concerns, but management and the board is responsible for the bank, not the regulator. We're responsible for overseeing the bank. And so that is the particular context. So some people will accuse us for waiting too long, other people will accuse us for acting too early. Ultimately, we have to weigh all of these issues, and we act in the interest of the depositors. And given the very wise advice and inputs we get from various people, that was the decision that the registrar made a recommendation to the minister. Minister would have also taken advice and ultimately took the decision to place the bank into curatorship. And lastly, we don't act, we act in terms of the Constitution without fear, favor, or prejudice. And this suggestion that the bank acts with bias or prejudice, I find highly objectionable, because I don't act in that way, and I know these fine colleagues of mine don't act in that way. And I think it's very sad that people make these suggestions that the bank acts with prejudice or bias. We don't see color. We look and regulate these entities that is under our responsibility to the best of our abilities.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Well, last one.
So can you just tell us how many clients they do actually have, retail clients and others?
I have those figures. No.
I don't know. Denzel, do you know how many clients they have? They do bank a number of stokvels, which may have a larger number of clients. I don't know the number of account holders they have directly.
Does somebody have the numbers? Okay. Okay, well, in the absence of any further questions, let me thank you kindly for your attendance on a Sunday afternoon. It's getting into evening already. That concludes the business of today.
All right, the breaking news at this hour. Reserve Bank Governor Lesetja Kganyago has just announced that the Venda-based bank, VBS Mutual Bank, will be placed under curatorship. He announced auditing firm Sizwe Ntsaluba Gobodo as the curator, and he said this auditing firm will act in the best interests of the bank and its clients. Well, this comes after City Press newspaper reported on Sunday that VBS Mutual Bank faced the possibility of a spectacular crash after the National Treasury's instruction to municipalities to stop investing with the institution. Now, this resulted in quite a number of councils withdrawing more than 1 billion rand from the bank, causing a serious liquidity crisis. And Kganyago, however, he did stress that the bank will still be open for business, and those who have loans with the bank should continue paying off those loans. Now, this is a bank that was relatively unknown until 2016, when it lent former President Jacob Zuma about 7.8 million rand to reimburse the state for the non-security upgrades for his Nkandla residents. The bank also came under the spotlight yet again when the passenger rail agency PRASA wanted to invest 1 billion rand with the bank, and that came against calls for the bank to prove or rather to produce evidence that the VBS bank actually was in compliance with the National Treasury regulations. All right, that press briefing was coming to us live from Pretoria, from the Reserve Bank headquarters.